Hi, Jake. Good to see
Hey,
you again.
Raffi. Good to see you too.
So today we wanted to dive into modern cards and the difference between modern and vintage. So I guess just to start us off, tell us what we mean by when we say modern and what you think about modern cards in general.
Yeah, so there's no like distinct line when people in the hobby talk about like what is modern, what is vintage, and everyone would kind of have their own opinion. They might draw it in different places. I think that you kind of have eras in Pokemon, and I think when that era switches from vintage or modern to vintage would be a subjective personal thing. I think clearly, Sun and Moon, X and Y, these sort of eras are definitely considered modern. And that there's sort of like a middle area, beginning in the, Heart Gold, Soul Silver era. And then I think that the sort of the original Nintendo EX era, I think, is starting to be referred to and thought of as vintage, sort of. And then the certainly the Wizards of the Coast era, which was that first era before Nintendo started printing the cards directly. That era is widely considered vintage in the hobby. So when we talk about is modern collectible, it's an important thing to know what we're talking about, specifically by modern. And so, for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to talk mostly about X and Y and sort of the Sun and Moon, and now the Sword and Shield era, and a little bit about some of those middle eras and maybe compare and contrast some stuff, some prices from those things.
Cool. So I'll just start with a very, very straightforward question, which is, why should I not just buy the modern version of cards? To give an example, right? There's Charizard from base set, which everyone loves. It looks awesome. It's super expensive. Now there's like a million different versions of Charizard GX. I can get the full art version, the full art, like rainbow rare, ultra special, secret, and obviously it's subjective, but some of those do look pretty cool to me. So why not just invest in like a rainbow rare Charizard instead of something that's like really old?
Yeah. So before going to the Rainbow Rare Charizard, which in Burning Shadows set, which is I think the most interesting card to talk about, and we can talk more specifically about the growth potential in that card and what we've seen so far with that card. But thinking of kind of like normal Charizard hollows that you might find in like Dragon Majesty or like the reprints in Evolutions from that base set. I think the things to think about of first of all, collect what for collectors, collect what you love and enjoy, and don't let people, push you around. If you really enjoy the card and you want the card, just because older people are telling you that base Charizard is cooler or whatever, that's subjective and up for you to decide. In terms of investable things that people look for in investments and things that people look for in like why they like their collectibles or what draws them to collectibles, things like rarity, scarcity, hard to find, hard to grade, these types of things. The modern cards, this whole basically when that original Charizard came out, the Wizards of the Coast Charizard in base set, people didn't think they'd be valuable. People didn't know they'd be valuable. Kids were opening these packs. There were very few adults kind of keeping these boxes and keeping them in good condition. But for the most part, people played with these cards. They had fun with these cards. And they weren't thought of as these super insanely valuable things that are going to be worth thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. So those cards, most of them were played. Most of them were beat up, and got a ton of damage on them. They're also, 20 years old, those cards. And so over those 20 years, a lot of these cards that didn't get graded or aren't still in sealed packs, which is a lot of where you're finding these mint cards now are from these sealed packs, which is part of why the sealed packs are so expensive. These old sealed packs were beat up. When you think of the modern cards, yes, the base set Charizard, there are lots and lots of copies of that base set Charizard were made, and maybe similar amounts to some of these modern sets, although I've read things that the modern sets are printed even a lot more than that base set. The base set Unlimited in WotC was printed.
So even like at the height of its popularity when we were kids, it's possible like Pokemon cards are even more popular now.
Yeah, and more are printed of these specific sets. But so people are opening these packs and people are using sleeves and putting them right into sleeves. People are protecting the Charizards. People are sending these Charizards in to PSA, to get graded right away when no one was doing that back then. And so if you look at like population reports of some of the modern Charizards, a great Charizard to look at is that
I'll pull it up right now.
The full art Charizard from Evolutions. This card was a huge hit when it first came out.
Mm-hmm.
And that full art Charizard from Evolutions, if we look at the price history of that, hopefully it will capture it here. Not this one, the full art version. So it would be.
I'll pull up sets, Evolutions. We've got
the Mega Charizard. It should be at the bottom actually of the set probably. It'll have a high number.
Full art Mega Charizard.
Yeah. So if you see this card, you see there are 2,334 PSA 10s. Okay. And you can also see the ratio from 10s to 9s. Now, that doesn't mean that out of the pack, most of these are 10s. It just means that like people didn't grade the 9s. So there's so many of these, and there are probably so many more PSA 9s out there that people have in their collections. They just were slightly off-centered or whatever and didn't grade. And then there's so many people who just don't grade cards, who open packs and just have these in their collections sitting there, potential gem mint 10s in the future. So this card, there could end up being, if this ever spiked and went to $100, $200, this could get over 5,000, over 10,000 PSA 10, if it ever got. And we're comparing that just for quick comparison. Why don't we take a look at that base set Charizard, the unlimited, not even the first edition one, and see how many there are. So there are only 423 in PSA 10 to 4,364. Wow. So you can see how many there are in these other categories. There are
and the picture is showing the first edition, but this is just the unlimited, right? Yeah,
this site does show that first edition on things, but it's not first edition. This is just the regular one, because it just shows one picture for each thing. So the thing to note here is that this is also 20 years old, and the box price. So to get new cards of these that have a chance at the PSA 10 costs you so much money, whereas Evolutions has basically stayed the same in price. So you can go out and buy an Evolutions box for like, $90, $100 right now, and try to open that Charizard. So there are many, many more of those Evolution boxes still out there, and they're much cheaper. So there are going to be a lot more of those cards. So that's why that Mega, and that Mega Charizard is harder to pull than this Charizard. These regular holo Charizards were 1 in 3 packs. That Mega Charizard is harder to pull, and yet there's still so many of those as the secret rare. There's still so many of those.
Right.
So you see that pattern for a lot of these types of cards.
And so I'm curious, like, are there any, on the whole, I get the impression from you, but correct me if I'm wrong, but like most of the modern cards are not good as investments. Are there any where that's not true?
So there are. So when we're talking about like modern set cards first, and English modern set cards, right now, I mean the top. So I sometimes I open modern for fun, and I was lucky, and I actually pulled this guy, this Burning Shadows Charizard card. This is probably as far as, and I got it graded, and it came back a 9 because actually Burning Shadows tends to be pretty difficult to grade. And pretty, you see a lot of like off-center cards and things like that. But with this card, and maybe we should pull this one up too and check the pricing.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about this card is like a lot of people, like I thought this card was way overvalued, and there were a lot of these cards. I thought there was a lot of hype around it initially, and that the price was going to go down. So this is an example of where I was wrong, because the price on this card has actually stayed really solid for a while and has started moving up along with everything else. As you can see at the bottom here, in the sales price history, you see that it's actually moving up right now. And actually, since its release, it's sort of steadily been kind of moving up, which is very unusual for modern. And I think you're going to tell us a little bit more about what you normally see in modern in terms of the way prices fluctuate around releases of sets. But this shows us that this card may be collectible and may be investable over time and may continue to rise in price. Now, when we look at value, like this card is very new. You know, it's from, I think Burning Shadows 2017. And there are already, you know, 654 tens. Now, if you notice, unlike the Mega Charizard, the distribution here is different. One, this card is harder to grade than the Mega Charizard, but two, because of the value of these cards, people are grading a lot more. So people are grading the 9s, people are grading the 8s, which also means, though, that there are a lot less of these than there are those, because they'd be coming out a lot more. People, because the price is so high on this card, you're likely going to see that more of the pop report is fully is filled out. You know, people aren't holding this card as much ungraded. Now, there's still going to be tons of these ungraded out there. And also, there's still a lot of Burning Shadows packs and Burning Shadows booster boxes, although they've been rising in price, somewhere between the $100 and $200 range right now, closer to the 100, I believe, last time I checked. That's nothing like the base set box, you know, which is going for, you know, $6,000 right now, or even more, 7,000 maybe now, as everything's rising, maybe 8,000 even.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk before we end the video a little bit about the playability of cards and how that impacts the prices and like a cyclical nature. You know, your focus is on like long term, and I just want to give the perspective of like, I played the game a little bit, and I want to put in a little bit of a plug for like the modern version of the Pokemon TCG game. It's actually a really good game. Like, I've played Magic, I've played Star Wars, and everything in between. I think the meta, at least as it was like 1 or 2 years ago when I was playing, was like great, really interesting, and really easy to get into, especially if you play online. So I never played like in paper tournaments and stuff, but I played online a lot, and it was awesome. So that impacts the prices of moderns a lot, because just like in Magic, right, there's a set of cards that are considered part of standard, and those go on rotation every year or so. Like, cards after being in standard for 2 or 3 years will cycle out. And so even a card that could be extremely expensive, the most playable card, eventually it'll cycle out and it won't be worth as much anymore. So the best example of this that I want to give is the card called Shaman EX. People have been playing or collecting recently will probably know about it. So Shaman is a card that could be used in pretty much every deck. It was used to make your deck more consistent, because it would let you draw up to a hand of 6 cards when you play it. So pretty much every deck would have, like, you know, 2, 3, even 4 Shamans. This isn't the right version. This is like the fake World Championship version. But right now the price of it is fairly low. At its peak, it was like 60, 70, at one point even $80. Now it looks like you can get it for under 15. And so at the time, when Shaman was at its peak price, the boxes of Roaring Skies, the set it came in, went extremely high, up to almost $300. But then the Pokemon Company reprinted Roaring Skies, meaning they put out a new print run of boxes. So the price of Shaman went all the way down. I don't remember it's exactly what, maybe $30, $20. And then over time climbed back up again, before eventually it went out of rotation, and then the price went down again. So I followed that trend as it was happening. I was just getting back into Pokemon, and I was like, I want to get on this next time this happens. So the next sort of iteration of Shaman EX was a card called Tapu Lele GX that was printed in Guardians Rising from the Sun and Moon era. So I'll just get the actual Guardians Rising version. So at its peak, this card was also extremely expensive. I don't know exactly how much, maybe $50 or $60. And then other things happened to it. So Pokemon printed out like a box set you could buy like at Walmart or Target or whatever that just had this card in it. And then eventually there was power creep, and they printed cards that I would consider even better versions of Tapu Lele, cards like Alola Ninetales GX that let you get 2 items in your hand, or recently Dedenne GX lets you discard your hand and draw a new hand. They're basically better versions of this. You don't even need this anymore. Jirachi is another one. So all those factors combined make the nature of modern cards like very, very unpredictable if you're trying to follow the playability. And the reasons for that are all the things I mentioned. There is the metagame and how it can change. There's power creep and better cards that can replace the current ones. There's the fact that it will go out of rotation within 2 or 3 years, almost guaranteed. There's the fact that the Pokemon Company could just reprint boxes of an entire set and put them back into production. They could reprint specific cards like they did with Tapu Lele and just throw them in like a Walmart box that anyone can buy, guaranteed to get the card. So that I counted, I think those are like 6 different factors that you just can't predict and don't have any control over. So my mistake was I bought a box of Guardians Rising when it was like $90, not so bad. I expected it to go up just like Roaring Skies did to $300, and it never did. it's still sitting at like 90, maybe $100. So I didn't lose money at least, but basically taught me a lesson that just like the stock market, you can't really predict like what's going to happen in terms of the playability of cards and how that impacts their prices. Therefore, if I ever did consider collecting modern, whether it's trying to flip or even invest for the long term, I would change my focus to be what's a more like collectible or iconic card, like the Charizard, even if it's not playable, because it's just too hard to predict.
Yeah. I guess a couple of things to mention. When we talk about modern, there's also sort of the more exclusive modern cards that are investable, that are a lot more investable because of their scarcity and rarity. So you have your sort of Japanese promos, which are not that rare and that scarce, but have really but do have set releases and are not being reprinted and things like that. So you have like the Mario and Luigi Pikachu cards. You have things like what we showed you in previous videos, those like, cosplay Pikachu cards. I brought one over here. I'm sending some of these out to PSA soon. These sort of Scream promo cards, which have cool art. And then you have your rarer cards. Here's a card. Here's one of these Art Academy cards from the Art Academy set that I'll show. These cards only have 100 copies in the world. They were given out directly to the artists who made these cards. And they've been popping up because those artists are selling out to people. And like a card like that is modern, it's from 2015, fairly modern, not very old, but because of that limited release, it's not going to have that mass produce effect like some of these other cards we've talked about today, even the Charizards. I do think that you can get some of these cards, some of these set cards. Let me go back to the set cards for a second. These types of cards, or the Hidden Fates shiny version of these cards. You can get them, the non-Charizard rewards and some of the other ones for, $20 to $30 in PSA 10. I do think that those cards are safe to buy at that price, because at that price, they're very unlikely to go down. They're gorgeous looking cards. They're cool cards. They're going to have a history. People are going to be connected to those things, and you're going to have kids today want those cards in PSA 10 someday. Are you going to see huge, crazy growth in those cards? No, because that's always going to be suppressed by the amount of those cards. And then when the price starts to go up on those cards, many more copies are going to flood the market, and we're going to see that. Now, that being said, if many, many more people get involved in the hobby, it's possible we'll look back on this in 10 to 20 years and say that these sets weren't printed that much. And at the time we were thinking 2, 3, 4, 5,000 was a ton of copies. But in reality, now it's like that wasn't a ton of copies.
Is a ton of copies of the PSA 10 specifically.
Of the PSA 10, I'm saying in this case, of that, or let's say that it fully, the Burning Shadows one ends up with 2,000 copies in PSA 10 eventually. It'll take a very long time to ever reach that. But let's say it does one day. Maybe that's not enough to go around, and that does make that card worth a few $1,000s, because it is such a cool card. It's got great art, and it's so important for that time period, that Burning Shadows one in particular.
Yeah. I'll give another example quickly of one that I think has long-term potential, right? And that's the full art Charizard from Flashfire. So the reason is, like, in the EX era, they printed EX cards both in the Black and White series and in the XY series. But starting in Sun and Moon, they switched to GX instead. And the GX full arts had a bit of a different style. Like, GX full arts have sort of like a solid color background, whereas the XY series full arts for the EX cards have backgrounds that are like more interesting. There's more going on. And so there were a ton of different versions of Charizard EX printed with different arts and different abilities and all that, but only one version that actually had a full art, and that was in Flashfire. And so this is, let me find the one that I'm talking about. This one over here is the only, as far as I know, the only full art pure like Charizard EX, not like Mega, not GX, not anything else, which has the pattern background, and I think
the first one.
Really cool pose. Exactly. And so this one's like extremely cheap compared, it looks like the PSA 10 has been going up even since I last looked at it, like last year. But like a PSA 9 or something you can still get for just much, much less. And I think cards like this, where it's like the first version of it that was printed, the only one that was done in this style within that era, especially for an iconic Pokemon like Charizard, does have long-term potential.
I will note before we go off of this, you can see, but if we go back to that for a second, Raffi, you do see though that it was selling for more when it first came out. And part of the pattern around these X and Y cards, these cards were actually much, much harder to grade. And so you see there are only 165 of these to 548 in PSA 10. So part of what people really like about these and the chase around these is they're much harder to grade than those rainbow rares.
And I assume that's the reason for this like insane gap between a 10 and a 9, right?
Yeah, and for the price growth also it makes them more collectible. But in the beginning, there were like so few of them, and it took so long to get 100, and so to get this many PSA 10s in the population chart. So in the beginning, it was like, how many of these are we even going to get? And so that's part of why there were these higher prices in the beginning of some of these.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm sorry to cut us off. I have to run soon, but are there any last thoughts or conclusions you think we should end with in terms of modern?
Yeah, there's so much we can say, and and talking about a lot more of those middle sets too eventually, and which specific cards, which specific sets are better than some of the other sets. I mean, one thing to quickly say on Flashfire too is a box recently sold for $1,000 in Flashfire. So you are seeing on some of the sealed product, though, like that specific set, because of that Charizard in particular, has gone for $1,000.
Yeah, and just so people know, if they're not familiar with modern prices, like when a box comes out, it's almost always the same price. Like when a set is in production, you can almost always get a box for $90, sometimes cheaper if you find like discounts on eBay and stuff. And so $90 is pretty standard for a box. Once they go out of print, sometimes they stay at $90, go up to 100 and kind of like flatline, essentially don't appreciate, and sometimes they go crazy like Flashfire that you mentioned.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the takeaway to try and wrap things up here is that collect modern and put your money in modern if you like it. Because it's not going to have the same return, and it's going to take a lot longer to have any return for the vast majority of these cards compared to the vintage. That's my opinion on it. But because of the lower price point on a lot of this modern, you might see plenty of these cards, double in value, for example, over the next 10, 15 years. And if you really like it, that's a nice return. Like these things are okay to collect, and you're not going to get destroyed, by collecting a lot of these things. Now the Charizard are some of these cards that are much higher price. Because remember, we talked about a lot of those rainbow rares are only like $20 to $30 in PSA 10. The Charizard is going for what? I forget what it said, 800 something now, 900, around there. That's a lot more risky. That's a much higher price. You do see that Charizard often is 10 times is something I tend to see more valuable than the regular ones. But at 10 times, those other cards should be at 80, roughly 80. If it were to follow that pattern, I see in other things. So I'll just, that's not always true for everything. And Pop Report has a lot to do with those, that 10 times type of thing. But for a similar Pop Report, it should probably be about 10 times more valuable. And it's more than that. So there may be some of those rainbow rares, which are very hard to pull. You only, you don't get more than one a box for sure. And you get one every other box type of thing, depending on the set.
And that's the thing you always talk about is look for those spreads that are abnormal, right? Yeah. In this case, that makes total sense. I will also just say, like, I personally really like the modern cards. I like both the vintage and the modern. I think like I am a sucker for the like cool secret rare, rainbow full art. I love the full arts most of all. I've actually bought mostly modern cards since I got back into collecting because I just love the full art so much, and it's like so cheap to get compared to the vintage stuff.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how these things age over time. It'll tell us a lot about the health of our hobby. If these cards really go up in value, even though they have large numbers, it'll be a great indicator that more people are joining the hobby, and be a great indicator that the kids who were collecting these are starting to get older and wanting to buy them and feel that connection. And those will be great signs for the hobby.
So you and I are basically in a controlled experiment. Whichever one of us retires with more money will be the winner. Good talking to you again, Jake.
Good talking to you. Bye.